Welcome to Assistant on Air, where we have conversations with people that build for Google Assistant. I'm Jessica Danae Earlycha, and I'll be your host today. I'm a developer advocate for Actions on Google, and our co-host is Riversong, which is my pup. And today we'll be chatting with Wally Brill. Welcome, Wally.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And thanks for having me, River.
So, Wally, what do you do here at Google?
So my title is Head of Conversation Design, Advocacy, and Education, which is a long-winded way of saying I travel around and run workshops and talk to people to help them make better conversations with robots, better actions on Google.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds fascinating. So as a developer, I know I'm building actions so then my robots can talk to people. And so I would love to talk to you about what are some great tips or what should a developer be thinking about when they're building their first action?
Well, primarily, they should be thinking about conversation. Mm-hmm. This is a conversation. It's not command and control. It's not barking orders at a machine. It's a completely natural conversation. We've been speaking, scientists now believe, for 500,000 years. And in that time, we've learned to have conventions of conversation. So we know when to take a turn. We know when to, that a falling intonation at the end of a sentence is probably a statement. Look, there's a lion, that kind of thing. And this is evolutionary. So we all have these conventions. And what we need to do is leverage them to make the conversations with the robot so that it's natural and easy.
Yeah. So what's the biggest difference when it comes to just human conversation compared to human to a robot? I'm sure there's some pieces that are missing or some things that as we are designing these conversations, we have to take into account.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. It's another great question. No, a couple of things. First off, because we're using our voice and we're talking to a robot, we don't have any of the visual cues that we would normally have when we're speaking with people. When you and I speak, we have micro expressions, we have body language. We indicate to each other how to move that conversation forward, right? We don't have any of that with the robot.
That's true.
Right? Mm-hmm. There's none of that interplay. So that's one of the things that we have to account for. So what we need to do is we need to make it really clear when it's the turn of the other person to talk. So we need to have a call to action at the end of every statement. So how does that work for you? Will that work? Yeah. What can I do for you now? Blah, blah, blah. So continually asking how to move the conversation forward.
Yeah. So it sounds like the words themselves are just so much more important when it comes to conversation, when you're designing. Because with our body language, you could tell if I've stopped talking or if I do some micro expression, and then you'll know it's your turn, per se. Okay, that's super cool. So for what would be the first thing after we figure out it should be a conversation? Then what would be the next step when building for a conversation?
Well, what are you making? First off, we've got to decide that there's an actual task that's valuable and that can be achieved with a voice-first environment or a voice-only environment. And so what is that task that we're trying to perform? And could it be done more easily in another way? Or are we actually providing benefit by using the Google Assistant to do it?
So what I'm hearing is that we shouldn't necessarily have every single type of action or interaction that a human and computer can have be all voice, but it should be the things that make sense to be voice.
That's correct. And don't forget that we're now on 1 billion devices with the Google Assistant around the world. And many, many, many of those have screens.
Yeah.
Right? It's only things like the Google Home and the Google Home Mini where you're using voice only. So otherwise we're using screens. We can bring up useful information on the phone. We can bring it up on the smart display, on the TV, all kinds of places. So there's the opportunity for multimodal interplay and multimodal design, which is really quite wonderful and quite new.
Totally. So if I'm a developer and I have figured out that I have this really great voice first kind of interaction, I want to order coffee at I have a local coffee shop that I run on the side. And I want to make an action with that. I want to build something. So what would be, I found my scenario. What should I do next?
What you should do next is get a real understanding of the brand that you're trying to convey. So what's your brand? What are the dimensions of that brand? Is it quirky and fun? Is it serious? Is it what are those things that you're trying to express as a brand? And where do those sort of descriptors live. What are they? So we understand the brand. Next thing we want to do is, who's going to use this? We need to understand the user. Because really, we're designing for someone, and we want to know what kind of environment they may be in, what's the context that they're going to use this in. Are they under time pressure? They're ordering coffee. Are they out on the street on the way to your coffee shop? Where are they? What are they doing? We want to understand as much about that as we possibly can.
Okay.
Right? So that's step 2. So we've got a task. We've got a user. The next thing we need to do is we need to develop a brand persona. What is the personality of your brand? And I'll tell you why that's important. So Clifford Nass and Scott Brave from Stanford did a load of research around what happens in that first second and a half of hearing a voice. And remarkably, we intuit all kinds of characteristics just from hearing someone's voice for a second or a second and a half.
Oh, wow.
It's really wild. We do it
That's
unconsciously.
amazing.
We do it automatically. There's no way to avoid it. So in that voice, you get a sense of age. You get a sense of education level. You get a sense of what we call register, which is, where is that being in relation to me in the social strata? Is it my peer? Is it my employee? Is it my superior? Where does it live? So that's register. And then if there's an accent, you get a sense of geography, right? But as they say on the infomercials, that's not all. There's more. We also get a sense of intelligence, trustworthiness, and likability. So all of these things come together in that first second and a half, and you're either going to create an enthusiastic impression and a positive impression, or you're going to create a negative one. And there's no such thing as no persona, because if you don't design it, then the listener is going to design it for you in their own imagination. Oh, wow. Right? No. So we have to design a persona. That's the next step.
That's amazing. It's amazing that only a second and a half, 2 seconds, like how quickly us as humans just pull all that data from something as simple as a few words.
Yeah, I think it's probably evolutionary again. We have a sense of what's dangerous and what's safe.
Yeah.
And what's positive and not.
Totally. Yeah. So that really emphasizes the importance of being thoughtful on how you craft the idea of persona, right? So who this person is that represents your brand.
That's right. And we go deep on it. Let me say there's a process for it. And so what we'll do is we'll create a series of documents. And you may say, Wally, why are we doing all that? Well, if you have 3 or 4 people writing prompts for your action on Google, right? Or even just you doing it from one point and then coming back 2 weeks later to write something else, you need to know exactly who that character is you're writing for. It can't vary from week to week or from prompt to prompt. It's got to be absolutely on track to be that personality. So we create a biography. We basically invent an ideal employee or an ideal robot or whatever, but we create a biography. This is who this character is. We go into things like age, we go into things like physical characteristics, because if it's somebody bigger, they may have a deeper voice. And if it's somebody who's smaller, they may have a higher voice. All of these factors kind of contribute to who that personality is. Now, there's another group of people who need to know this, and that's whoever is the voice artist that you're using, if you're using a live voice artist, to record the prompts, because they need a suit of clothes to put on. So they need to wear that persona. They need to wear that biography. And anybody who's coaching those prompts in the studio, right? Even if you're using text-to-speech, which, you may very well, we still want to make sure that it's consistent and the language is consistent. So there's more stuff, but I'll take a break there and see if you have any questions.
Oh, no, that sounds fascinating. It almost even sounds like you're building kind of a backstory of a character, like to go on film, like something so that people can really understand who that person is. And especially when you were talking about other writers, because I could definitely see some actions get so large that you need multiple people writing these dialogues. That would be really nice to have as a concrete way to ground it. So we have the biography.
You got a biography. Then what we do is we create a couple of paragraphs of what we call a monologue. So this may just be a conversation that this character is having in a bar with a friend or wherever. And so we'll write a conversational monologue that's in first person, and we'll get that character to read that monologue. So the voice actor, if we're using live voice talent, or if we're using text-to-speech, we'll record it. And we'll know very quickly if it sounds natural. And what that does is it gives more depth to the character. Because if you're just trying to get the sense of the character off prompts, that's not going to give you enough to really get into it. So the monologue really helps. And then the third and possibly most important thing is what we call sample dialogues. Now, a sample, and you'll hear, if you watch other videos of the series and things like, you'll hear people talking about sample dialogues. A sample dialogue it's like a play between two characters. There's a user and there's a robot, right? And the user says something, the robot responds. The user says something, the robot responds. We write out basically the design of the interaction as a two-part play. So you'll go through the most important paths of what the action's going to be and what it's going to do. You know, hi, welcome to Jessica's coffee shop. I'd like to order a double latte, please. Sure, I can help you with that. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So we write that out. We'll read it aloud to see if it makes sense. And that's really the core of how we design. We design from the conversation. So having those artifacts really brings the thing to life and gives you a real impression of what you're going to be developing for.
Yeah, definitely. I know when I was building my first action, I tried to do all the steps, but I actually didn't do the step of reading it out loud or hearing it. I just read it to myself, and I think I had already knew what I wanted it to sound. But once I actually heard it coming out from the assistant, I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds way more formal than I wanted it to be. It sounded, it didn't sound casual and kind of relaxed. And that was the persona I wanted to. So even though I had that in mind, my actual writing, because I didn't hear it, I didn't listen to it, it didn't come out that way, which was interesting.
It's really interesting, and it's not unusual. So written language is generally more formal. You don't generally use contractions. It's also more permanent, so you can look down the page. You can look at different areas of the conversation while you're having it, right?
Yeah.
Spoken language is ephemeral. It's here and it's gone. It's linear, right? You say something, it's gone. What's next, right? So it's really important that we read these things aloud, because otherwise we do very often fall into that trap of using what's written language and trying to turn that into spoken language. Right. And they're different.
This sounds really exciting.
What was your first action?
My first action was a whiteboarding practice one, which actually I demonstrated on this series on the first episode. So It was a lot of fun to be able to build that out. But I did the mistake where I went code first. I saw everything. I saw the design docs and I was like, that's nice. I'll do that later, because coming from a web background, I thought you could do those two different things separately. And I didn't realize how intertwined conversation design and the actual building of the project is. And so I'm definitely a firm believer whenever I meet people that want to build, like, no, learn from me. Don't make my mistakes. It was not worth it, because I kept hitting onto errors or kind of to roadblocks that I thought were technical issues.
Right.
But they weren't. It was because I didn't have a good conversation design. I didn't know where we were going. I had just the happy path, but I didn't think about like all the edge cases that could potentially happen, or somebody who wasn't like me. Right. And that, I think, was my biggest downfall. So being able to have a conversation design and be able to think those things first before you even code would have saved me hours of time.
Right. And that's really it. That's really the message that we want people to take away. And, you know, the point you make about having a map, that's what that conversation design is. That's what that sample dialogue is. It's the map. And it just serves us really well.
No, that's fantastic. So if there's somebody watching and there's a developer and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm super excited, Wally, this sounds amazing, what should be their first thing that they should go to where they're looking up online or getting some tips and tricks?
So Okay, developers, this is for you. actions.google.com/design is our basic repository for everything to do with conversation design. So that's actions.google.com/design. I'm sure it's right there.
Yeah, we'll put it.
Is it underneath? Yeah. Okay. It's probably, yeah. That's one thing.
Yeah.
There's a book by the wonderful Dr. Kathy Pearl called Designing Voice User Interfaces, which is a splendid book. She, of course, is a Googler. There's another book by James Giangola called Voice User Interface Design, which is the original guidelines around how to create conversations for automated systems. It's 15, 20 years old now, but it's still absolutely relevant. The other thing I would say is pick up a copy of Cliff Nass and Scott Brave's book, Wired for Speech. It's really, really interesting about all of these topics. They really went deep on how humans and computers interact. And they created a lot of the foundational information that serves us really well in design now.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Wally. Really appreciate you spending time with us and sharing all this knowledge. This is great.
Well, thank you, and thank River.
Yeah, thanks.
Splendid. You got to show River's tail.
Oh, my goodness. Come on, baby, wake up. Oh, there she goes. Oh. We hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, please leave a comment below. Follow us on Twitter for updates and new episodes. I've been Jessica. Chat with you next time.